You know what the word Oasis actually means? Not a luxury resort. Not a professionally landscaped garden that cost $40,000 and took a crew of 6 months to build. An oasis is simply a place that feels completely different from everything surrounding it. A place that makes you exhale the moment you step into it. A place that belongs to you in a way no other space does. Every backyard has that potential. Not some backyards. Every single one, including the one you have written off as too small, too awkward, too shaded, too expensive to do anything meaningful with. I have transformed backyards that started as nothing but a concrete slab and a dying lawn. I have seen spaces half the size of a parking space become places people chose to spend every evening of the summer in. And the thing every single one of those transformations had in common was not budget. It was a sequence of smart decisions made in the right order. Today on Daily Garden Fix, 12 genius cheap backyard landscaping ideas that unlock the oasis your backyard is already capable of being. Idea 7 is the one that changes the feeling of the space before a single plant goes in. Idea 11 costs almost nothing and produces the single most dramatic visual transformation on this entire list. Both are coming and neither one is what you are expecting. Let us unlock something. Idea 1. Start with a landscape sketch, not a shopping trip. Standard backyard transformations start at the garden center, buying things that look good in the store and figuring out where they go later. My sketch-first approach produces a transformation that looks designed rather than accumulated, for $0 spent before the pencil hits the paper. Here is what is unique. Stand at the back door and photograph the backyard from that single viewpoint, because that is the view experienced most often and the one every design decision should prioritize. Print the photograph or prop it on a table. Sketch directly over it with a pen, marking the one element that bothers you most, the one corner with the most potential, and the single sightline you want to improve. 3 marks. Not a full plan. 3 priorities. The innovation is the one-at-a-time rule applied from the first decision. Every cheap landscaping transformation that ends up looking cheap did so because too many elements were introduced simultaneously, none of them given enough space, enough context, or enough budget to do their job properly. 3 priorities ranked in order means the first dollar and the first hour go to the most impactful change available. The space improves visibly before the second priority begins. Cost. 0. The planning decision that makes every dollar spent after it go further than it would have without it. Idea 2. Grade the ground before anything goes on it. Standard landscaping projects work with whatever ground level exists and design around the problems it creates. Pooling water, uneven surfaces, dead patches of lawn that drain poorly. My ground grading approach eliminates those problems permanently before any new element is introduced. Here is what is unique. A long timber straight edge, a length of 2x4 works perfectly. Dragged across the lawn or soil surface identifies every high and low point in the existing ground level. Low points that pull water after rain get top-dressed with a thin layer of sharp sand and quality topsoil, raked level and allowed to settle for 1 week before any planting or surface treatment goes on top. High points that create tripping hazards or uneven paving surfaces get skimmed off with a spade and the removed soil redistributed to adjacent low points. The innovation is treating ground leveling as a landscaping feature rather than a preparatory task. A deliberately graded gentle slope, 2 to 3 centimeters drop across every meter of garden, drains rainwater away from the house and toward the garden boundary consistently and permanently. No more pooling. No more soggy patches. No more bare mud where grass refuses to grow because the roots are sitting in standing water. Cost. 0 in materials. 1 afternoon of physical effort. The invisible improvement that makes every visible improvement on top of it look and perform better than it would on ungraded ground. Idea 3. Define zones with gravel and edging. Standard backyards are one undivided space, lawn or paving from boundary to boundary with no internal structure and no sense of different areas existing within the whole. My zone definition approach creates multiple distinct spaces within the same backyard without building a single wall or laying a single new paving slab. Here is what is unique. Steel edging strip, thin gauge corten or galvanized pushed into the ground with a rubber mallet, creates clean precise lines between zones at ground level. Inside the lines, decorative gravel in a warm buff or white quartz tone replaces tired lawn or bare soil in the zones designated for seating, dining, or the fire pit. Outside the lines, the existing lawn or planting continues unchanged. The innovation is using gravel tone to create visual temperature in different zones. A warm buff gravel under the dining zone reads as inviting and social. A cool white quartz under a shaded reading corner reads as calm and contemplative. The same garden in the same afternoon light feels like two different places because the surface beneath each zone tells a different story. Cost: $30 to $60 for edging and gravel across a standard backyard. The structural decision that makes the space feel twice as large as it did when it was one undivided surface. Idea 4. Build a dry creek bed for drainage and drama. Standard drainage solutions are underground, a French drain, a soakaway, a buried pipe that solves the water problem invisibly and contributes nothing to the look of the garden above it. My dry creek bed approach solves the same drainage problem on the surface, visibly, beautifully, and for a fraction of the cost. Here is what is unique: a sculpted channel of smooth river pebbles and larger boulders placed in a naturally winding course across the garden, following the natural low line that water already takes after heavy rain. Channel surface water toward a suitable outlet at the garden boundary while reading as a deliberate landscape feature rather than a drainage solution. The innovation is the planting along the creek banks that completes the transformation from drainage channel to landscape feature. Ornamental grasses, Pennisetum, Miscanthus, and Carex, planted in drifts along both sides of the creek bed, their stems arching over the stones at the edge, create the appearance of a real stream bank that has been growing there for years. The dry creek that handles water once a week looks like a garden feature every day of the year. Cost: $40 to $80 in stone and plants. The landscaping feature that solves a real problem and looks like it was designed specifically for the space. Idea 5. Plant trees for instant structure. Standard planting starts with ground-level plants, flowers, grasses, ground covers, and waits years for the garden to develop the height and structure that makes it feel complete. My tree-first approach introduces the vertical structure immediately and lets everything else grow up around it. Here is what is unique: a single well-chosen tree planted in the right position does more for the structure, the character, and the maturity of a backyard than any combination of ground-level planting. Not a large, expensive specimen, a bare root or container-grown tree in a small size, planted correctly and staked for 2 seasons, establishes faster and more vigorously than a larger, expensive specimen that spends its first 2 years recovering from transplant stress. The innovation is choosing the tree for its winter silhouette rather than its summer appearance. The tree that looks magnificent in leaf looks magnificent for 6 months. The tree with a beautiful branching structure, a multi-stem birch, a crabapple with a naturally arching form, a Japanese maple with horizontal branching, looks extraordinary in every season, including the bare months when every other garden element is dormant. Cost: $15 to $40 for a small container-grown tree. The investment that pays structural dividends for decades and makes every other planting decision more resolved by existing first. Idea 6. Use mulch as a design material, not just a soil cover. Standard mulch application spreads bark chip across planted beds as a functional weed suppressant and moisture retainer, applied uniformly, invisibly, and without any consideration of its aesthetic contribution to the landscape. My mulch as design approach treats it as a surface material with the same visual weight as gravel or paving. Here is what is unique: 3 different mulch materials used in 3 different zones of the garden: fine bark chip in the planted borders for a natural woodland feel, coarse wood chip in the wilder, more naturalistic areas for a rougher organic texture, and decorative slate chip in the contemporary zones near the house where the harder, more angular material reads as an intentional design choice rather than a mulching product. The innovation is the deep application that changes the visual quality of the mulch from a thin layer to a surface in its own right. At 2 inches deep, bark chip looks like a maintenance product. At 4 inches deep, the same material looks like a considered surface treatment that gives the planted border the same visual weight as a paved pathway or a gravel zone. The plants emerging through 4 inches of deep bark chip look placed rather than growing, each stem rising from a clean, dark, unified surface that makes every leaf and every flower color more vivid by contrast. Cost: $20 to $40 for enough mulch to cover an average backyard's borders at full depth. The surface upgrade that looks like a design decision and functions as a year-round maintenance solution simultaneously. Idea 7. Paint the fence a color that changes the feeling of the space. This is Idea 7, the one that changes the feeling of the entire space before a single plant goes in. Standard fence painting means brown or gray, the default color of timber that has never been considered as a design element. My color-first fence approach uses the largest vertical surface in the backyard as the backdrop that every other element in the garden is arranged against. Here is what is unique: the fence is not a boundary. It is a wall. And a wall painted in the right color does for a backyard exactly what a painted wall does for an interior room. It sets the emotional tone of the entire space. Deep forest green makes the backyard feel enveloped, private, and lush, Every plant in front of it appears more vivid and more abundant. Warm charcoal makes it feel contemporary and calm. Every terracotta pot and every warm-toned plant pops against the dark neutral. Dusty terracotta makes it feel warm and Mediterranean. The fence becomes part of the planting palette rather than simply its backdrop. The innovation is painting only the fence panels that form the primary backdrop of the main outdoor living zone, not necessarily every fence in the garden. One run of panels behind the seeding area. One panel behind the main planting bed. The color concentrated where it has the most visual impact rather than diluted across the entire boundary. 2 coats of exterior timber paint applied with a short pile roller. One Saturday morning. The backyard that felt like a yard becomes a space with an identity. Cost: $15 to $30 for paint and primer. The transformation that costs $30 and changes how the space feels before anything else is added. Idea 8. Layer solar lighting for evening transformation. Standard backyard lighting means one string of lights strung along the fence and nothing else. Functional, flat, and incapable of producing the layered warmth that makes an outdoor space feel genuinely inviting after dark. My 3-layer solar approach creates depth, atmosphere, and the kind of evening quality that makes people choose to stay outside. Here is what is unique. Layer 1 is overhead, solar festoon lights in a gentle curve between 2 shepherd's hook stakes at the outer corners of the main living zone. Warm white at 2700 Kelvin exclusively. Layer 2 is at eye level, solar wall sconces on the fence behind the seating at seated head height, the angle that makes faces and surfaces look their best. Layer 3 is at ground level, solar spike lights angled upward at 45 degrees through planted borders, illuminating foliage from below rather than shining down onto soil. The innovation is the dusk-on automation applied to every fixture from the first evening. All 3 layers activate simultaneously without a switch, without a cable, and without a single penny of running cost. The backyard that disappears after sunset becomes the backyard that is worth being in until midnight, lit automatically, every evening, in the 3 layers that professional outdoor lighting designers use in spaces that cost 10 times as much to illuminate. Cost: $50 to $80 for the complete 3-layer system. The evening transformation that runs itself every night for free after the first purchase. 8 ideas in and 4 to go, including idea 11, the one I promised at the start. The almost zero-cost idea that produces the single most dramatic visual transformation on this entire list. It takes one afternoon, requires no specialist skills, and changes the backyard in a way that every other idea on this list builds on. And idea 12, the finishing move that locks every other improvement into a space that reads as one complete designed landscape. Both are coming right now. Idea 9. Introduce water for sound and wildlife. Standard backyard water features are either expensive permanent installations or cheap plastic fountains that look exactly as cheap as they cost. My self-contained recirculating approach delivers the transformative quality of moving water, the sound, the light reflection, the wildlife attraction, for under $100 with zero ongoing maintenance. Here is what is unique. A large sealed glazed pot or a stone trough as the reservoir, completely watertight, no open water surface visible. A low wattage submersible pump inside, feeding water up through a column of stacked slate, river stone, or a drilled copper pipe mounted vertically above the reservoir. Water emerges at the top, sheets or trickles back down over the stone column, and returns to the sealed reservoir below in a continuous recirculating loop. The innovation is the acoustic effect that a self-contained water feature produces in a backyard that previously had none. Traffic softens.
Ambient nachwowood nuis arrasedes.
The sound of moving water fills the foreground of the acoustic environment in the same way that a painted fence fills the visual background, establishing the character of the space for everyone in it without competing with any other element. Cost: $70 to $100 for pot, pump, and stone. Running cost: negligible. A low wattage pump uses less electricity per day than a phone charger on a standard outlet connection. Idea 10. Create a focal point with found stone. Standard backyard landscaping introduces focal points through purchased ornaments, stone spheres, ceramic pots, metal sculptures, objects that announce their own price point in the way they are finished and displayed. My found stone approach creates focal points with objects that look ancient, considered, and completely irreplaceable, because they are. Here is what is unique. A single large, interesting stone, found on a beach, a riverbank, a building site, or sourced free from a neighbor's renovation, placed with intention at the end of a sightline, at the corner of a planted bed, or as a standing stone set upright in the back of a border reads as a sculptural object of genuine presence. The key distinction between a stone that reads as art and a stone that reads as a rock is placement, elevated slightly on a concealed concrete pad, surrounded by low planting that frames it without competing with it, positioned at the precise point where the eye naturally rests when standing at the back door. The innovation is using multiple found stones at different scales to create a landscape of natural objects that feels discovered rather than designed. 3 large boulders at the base of the newly planted tree from Idea 5. A flat stepping stone of interesting texture between 2 gravel zones. A small cairn of stacked river stones beside the water feature. The accumulation of found stone across the landscape gives the backyard the quality of a natural environment shaped by human hands, rather than a designed garden assembled from purchased components. Cost: 0 for found stone. The most characterful focal point material available at any price point costs nothing beyond the decision to pick it up and bring it home. Idea 11. Whitewash one wall or fence panel. This is Idea 11, the almost zero-cost idea that produces the single most dramatic visual transformation on this entire list. Standard exterior walls and fence panels are one color, whatever they arrived as, whatever weather has done to them since. My whitewash approach turns the most prominent surface in the backyard into the brightest, most reflective element in the entire landscape. Here is what is unique. 1 part exterior white masonry paint diluted with 2 parts water, a thin wash rather than a full coat, applied with a large brush in long strokes across 1 brick wall, 1 rendered surface, or 1 timber fence panel. The diluted wash covers without obscuring. The texture of the brick, the render, or the timber grain reads through the finish, contributing its surface interest, while the uniform pale tone of the wash unifies the entire surface into a single bright plane. The innovation is what that bright plane does to every plant, every pot, and every garden element in front of it. A whitewashed surface reflects light back into the planted space it faces, illuminating shaded corners, making dark foliage appear richer, and making every flower color appear more saturated and vivid than it does against the weathered dark fence or wall it replaced. It is not just a backdrop. It is a light source. Apply on a dry day when temperature is above 10 degrees Celsius. 1 coat. Allow to dry completely, 4 hours in good conditions. The transformation is immediate. The same plants in front of a whitewashed surface look different, more considered, more vivid, more expensive, than they did in front of anything else. Cost: $10 to $20 for masonry paint used at heavily diluted wash ratio covering a large area per tin. The transformation that costs $15 and changes everything in front of it. Idea 12. Apply the Oasis audit. This is Idea 12, the finishing move. The decision that locks every other improvement into a space that reads as one complete designed landscape rather than 11 separate good ideas sitting in the same backyard. Here is the genius. Stand at the back door, the position from which the sketch was made in Idea 1, and look at the finished backyard with one question in mind. Does this feel like one place or like several things happening in the same space? The Oasis is always one place. The unfinished backyard is always several things. The difference is cohesion. The quality of the space that comes from materials, colors, and tones repeating across multiple elements rather than each element introducing something new. The innovation is the single material audit applied to the finished landscape. Walk the space and identify the material that appears most frequently. Gravel tone, timber color, metal finish, plant palette. That material is the signature of the landscape. Every element that carries it belongs to the Oasis. Every element that does not is the detail that is stopping the space from reading as complete. Fix the outlier. Paint the one silver bracket that is still silver when everything else is black. Replace the one pot in a tone that belongs to a different color story. Add the same gravel tone to the one border that is still bare soil when every other zone has its surface treatment. One fix. One outlier corrected. The whole space clicks into cohesion. Then stand at the back door again. Look at what was built. And notice, for the first time, that the backyard feels like somewhere. Not just a yard behind the house. An oasis. The one the space was always capable of being. Cost: $0 to $15 for whatever the outlier fix requires. The finishing audit that makes 12 weekends of smart decisions read as one complete, deliberate, unified landscape design. Add a simple timber arbor over the back door, 2 posts, 2 beams, 1 crossbar, and a climbing rose or wisteria train from the first season, and the transition from the house into the garden becomes a moment rather than a step. Under $60 in timber. A threshold that makes entering the garden feel like arriving somewhere. Plant the fence base continuously rather than in individual pots. A continuous planting at the base of every fence run, a mix of ground cover, low shrub, and tall structural grass planted in irregular drifts rather than evenly spaced rows, gives the boundary a connection to the ground that individual pots never achieve. The fence stops floating above the garden and becomes part of it. Use the same stone throughout. Whatever stone appears in the dry creek bed from idea 4, appears around the water feature from idea 9, and appears as the gravel infill in the zones from idea 3. Keep it the same type, the same color, the same size range. Stone that repeats across multiple landscape elements is the single most effective cohesion material available. It costs no more to choose one stone consistently than to choose 3 different ones randomly. The pattern across all 12 ideas is the same. The cheap backyard oasis is never cheap because corners were cut. It is cheap because the right decisions were made in the right order, each one building on the last, each one making the next one easier and more effective. That sequence of decisions is what this list is. Follow it in order and the oasis unlocks itself. 12 genius cheap backyard landscaping ideas. 1 oasis unlocked. A sketch that set the priorities before a single dollar was spent. Graded ground that made every surface above it perform better. Zones defined by edging and gravel that made one space feel like several. A dry creek bed that solved a drainage problem and looked like a landscape feature. A tree planted first that gave every other element something to grow around. Mulch used as a design material rather than a maintenance product. A painted fence that changed the emotional tone of the entire space before a single plant went in. 3 layers of solar lighting that transformed the backyard every evening automatically. A self-contained water feature that changed the sound of the space permanently. Found stone placed with intention as free landscape sculpture. A whitewashed surface that lit up everything in front of it for $15. And a finishing audit that made all 12 decisions read as one complete designed landscape. Idea 7 changed the feeling of the space before anything else was added. Idea 11 produced the most dramatic visual transformation on the list for almost nothing. And the whole thing adds up to a backyard that feels like an oasis, not because of what was spent on it, but because of the sequence of decisions made inside it. Which idea are you starting with? Drop a comment and tell me what your backyard looks like right now. I read every single comment and I reply to every one. Subscribe to Daily Garden Fix because new landscaping ideas, budget transformations, and outdoor space guides come out every single week. Share this with one person whose backyard is waiting to become something. It might be exactly the sequence of decisions they needed. Now go outside. Make the first decision. The oasis is already there. It just needs unlocking.